Good morning. Welcome to the webinar series on COVID-19 and novel infectious disease organized by the Policy Research at Hong Kong IAPS at the Chinese University of Hong Kong. The COVID-19 pandemic has affected the world for over a year. The pandemic is drawing tremendous global and local public attention, not only to medical and epidemiological research, but also to interdisciplinary research in behavioral and social science that can inform policies. Unprecedented city-level or national-level lockdowns have given rise to challenging political, economic, and socio-psychological problems affecting people from all walks of life. Quarantine, wearing masks, and social distancing have almost become common requirements around the world. Yet, adoption and compliance and effectiveness vary across jurisdictions. The economic downturn and strain on the healthcare system pose dilemmas to policymakers. Misinformation and erosion of public trust threaten good governance. The fallout caused by this pandemic and future novel infectious diseases will bring continuing global challenges. We have a lot to learn from the responses to the pandemic. More up-to-date and evidence-based academic research grounded on empirical scientific evidence is badly needed for policy reference. The CUHK Policy Research at Hong Kong IAPS program was established to promote cross-boundary and interdisciplinary collaboration on policy research. We're pleased to present a series of webinars to share the works of our researchers across different faculties on issues related to the pandemic with implications on policy decisions. Today's webinar is on behavioral responses to COVID-19, the role of institutions and identity. During this pandemic, countries applied different lockdown and social distancing measures with varying results, depending on the compliance and cooperation of its citizens. The speakers today hope to share their viewpoints about the role of institutions and identity in shaping our behavioral responses to COVID-19, and look forward to exploring the following questions with you. How do economic, social, and political factors shape behavioral responses to COVID-19? What are the links between national identification and engagement in disease preventive behaviors in China and the US specifically? Our speakers include Professor Ying-yi, Professor at the Department of Management, CUHK Business School, Dr. Hongchuan Shen, Postdoctoral Fellow at the Department of Decision Sciences and Managerial Economics at the CUHK Business School. Our discussant is Professor Tian, Associate Professor, College of Business at the Shanghai University of Finance and Economics. We will invite the two speakers to speak first, followed by the discussant. And the two speakers will speak for about 20 minutes, followed by the discussant's response for about 15 minutes. Thereafter, we'll open the discussion to the Q&A session. If you have any questions, please feel free to raise it and send it in first through the chat box to our administrators, and we'll arrange for you to raise the questions at the Q&A session. Let me introduce our first speaker, Professor Ying-yi. Professor Hong received her PhD from Columbia University. Her research focused on culture and cognition, multicultural identity and intergroup relations. She has received several awards for her pioneering research, including the International Society for Self and Identity Outstanding Early Career Award in 2004, and the Nanyang Award for Research Excellence in 2013. Most recently, she received the 2020 Outstanding Contributions to Cultural Psychology Award. Her book, The Oxford Handbook of Multicultural Identity, has won the Ursula Gillen Global Psychology Book Award. Please join me in welcoming Professor Hong Ying-yi. Ying-yi, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Fanny, for your kind introduction. So I'm very happy to see you all today here, and may I share my screen with you. So today I'm going to share with you some recent findings from my research team regarding the link between national identification and disease preventive behaviors in China and the United States. And so this research is based on the paper here listed below. This paper is impressed in political psychology. And if any of you are interested in reading the paper, please contact me afterwards. I'm more than happy to send you the paper. So let's start. On 20th January last year, year 2020, China and WHO have announced that the SARS-CoV-2 coronavirus, which is causing the COVID-19 pandemic, is transmissible from human to human. Subsequently, many government and medical experts start to recommend disease preventive behaviors, which include, for example, washing hands, keeping distance, stay at home, wearing masks. So all of us are very familiar with this already. And also research that use simulation have shown that curbing the disease requires people to jointly engage in disease preventive practices. So this COVID-19 is a collective crisis. And however, even with this, we see a lot of resistance to disease preventive practices. So some people are not willing, or they are very reluctant to adopt these disease preventive practices. And there were now a number of reports and research on that. And there are many different reasons. Some of the major reasons include, for example, the disease preventive practices impose personal costs, economic costs, physical discomfort, or it reduce freedom and autonomy. And some people underestimate the risk of being infected by the disease. For example, some of them believe that COVID-19 is a host or just like a common flu. And also there are so many misinformation around the internet and social media, and all these didn't help. And free riders mentality as well. So some people might be reluctant to adopt disease preventive practices because they think that, oh, I can free ride on other people's disease preventive efforts. Other people need to do it, but not me. So to counter these resistance, we look into some psychological theories. One theory we refer to is social identity theory. It focuses on the social identity of people. So social identity is defined as individual self-concept derived from perceived membership in a social group. So when people endorse or embrace their social identity, it will lead them to think, feel, or act on behalf of the group. And also, social identity motivates people to concern the wellness of the group, prioritize collective interests over personal interests. And also past research, a lot of accumulated evidence already shown that in-group identification predicts in-group cooperative behaviors. So naturally, we think that maybe in this regard, we will see some beneficial effect of national identification. So national identification precisely look at how one feel about their national identity. So we think that with national identification, people might have a sense of common fate, and it will protect, they will be motivated to protect their fellow citizens. And also, a national identity would help to unify people from subgroups to engage in behaviors that benefit the whole superordinate group. Here we say national group, like the fellow citizens. So a very straightforward idea is that when people engage in this national identification, for example, I feel good being, so a member, like a member of my nation, I will engage more. So positive sign here meaning more. More, it will increase the engagement in disease preventive behavior. And also with that, we might be able to see national identification increasing as well. So the engagement in disease preventive behavior could lead to a higher national identification across time. So in order to understand that, we think that, of course, if we want to infer a causal relationship, it would require experiments. But however, with COVID-19, and also especially when we conduct the study, it was last year. So second to experimental method, we think that the second best method might be using a longitudinal design to test the temporal covariations. Aside from that, one other thing we notice is that because different nations have different political landscapes, and the way they implement disease preventive behaviors are quite different. So we thought, okay, maybe let's look at two examples. So in our own empirical study, we look at China, which we think it has a more homogeneous national discourse on the fight against COVID-19. And another nation, the United States, which we think that is a contrast because it adopt a more heterogeneous national discourse in the fight against COVID-19. Now, let's start with the first case. So in our first study, we looked at China, and our argument is that in China, when you look at all the policy and regulations, we see a centralized and homogeneous government structure. And when you implement the COVID-19 regulations, it's very strict and mandatory from a top-down manner, okay? And also very early on, the government has set up and sent out clear national message in fighting COVID-19. For example, President Xi from the very beginning said that this is a war against the disease. And we have to be really strict and adhere to all the lockdown and whatnot. So we think this would be allow us, or this led us to speculate that the link will be quite straightforward. So a high national identification, I feel good being Chinese, would increase or would be associated with higher engagement in disease preventive behaviors. And this would also, in return, led to a positive association of national identification. So how did we do it? So we employed a APP app, is an online survey platform. And so we load our questionnaire on this online platform, and the first time we collect data was February to March last year, 2020. And at that time, actually, the spread of the COVID-19 is quite severe. So the average new cases per day was 900 some. You know, there were days that are much higher than 1,000 or a few thousand. But during this time, actually, we have conducted our first survey. And then time 2 was late April last year. And at this time, actually, COVID-19 was largely contained already. So the average case was only 11 per day nationwide. So altogether, we had collected data from 1,200 participants who have filled out both the time 1 and time 2 survey. And among this group is about equally divided, slightly more, you know, male, but largely equally divided in terms of gender. And the mean age was 31 years old. And what did we ask them? On the survey, actually, we asked national identification. We asked 4 items. Sample item, something like this. At this moment, to what extent do you agree that I feel good about being Chinese? Okay, 1 to 6 point. And also, we asked disease preventive behaviors. So we asked in the past week, how often you wear a mask in public places. So we asked the 10 behavioral recommended by the Chinese CDC. Aside from those, we also collect a whole host of control variables. So for example, positive and negative emotions, COVID-19 risk perception. So this is how likely do you think that you would contract the disease, your family will contract the disease, or people in your neighborhood would contract the disease. We also ask confidence in the institutes. So Chinese scientists, Chinese government, to what extent do you think that they have the ability to tackle COVID-19? And we also ask the participants' own age, gender, education, income. So these covariate variables or control variables, actually we enter as covariate because we know that these variables, for example, risk perception would of course affect people's disease preventive behavior. And also, for example, positive, negative emotions as well. So our idea is that given we partial out or given we control these well-known variable or likely suspect, so to speak, would national identification still have a temporal correlate with disease preventive behaviors? So that's our empirical research question. So we have conducted temporal regression and cross-lag analysis and whatnot. But before I show you the formal numbers, I want to just share with you, visualize our data with you so that you have a sense, a close sense of the type of data we have. So this is a scatter plot on the relationship between time 1 national identification and time 2 disease preventive behavior. So time 1 national identification is here from 1 to 6, right? Yeah. And then the time 2 disease preventive behavior is here 1 to 5, the higher the more frequent. So by and large, you see that our samples endorse about the midpoint national identification is quite high, but still luckily we have variations. So there is a good spread of different degree of national identification. And similarly, disease preventive behavior was high in general, but still we see a spread. And actually from this, you can observe or discern a positive relationship already. And mind you, time 2 actually in mainland China, COVID-19 is largely contained already, but you still see people endorsing quite high disease preventive behavior. And we think that this could be very genuine, you know, and endorsement, not really due to strict regulation, because at that time the regulation have been lifted already. Now, these are longitudinal relationships, so we need to run all type of cross-lag analysis and controlling for from the time 1 predictor to predict time 2 outcome, but then controlling for the time 1 outcome variables. So from here, after, even after we control all the covariates, we still observe a statistically significant relationship from time 1 national identification to time 2 disease preventive behavior. So the first part of our link, our speculated link was supported. Now, another link is from disease preventive behavior to national identification. We also find a significant relationship there. And however, mind you, the national identification was quite stable, quite high. So although we see a slight increase and also a statistically significant increase, but the effect size was not very big. But in short, the whole link was supported in study 1 by a very simple 2-time point longitudinal study in China. Now, moving on, would it be the same in the United States? So in the United States, actually, I just said it's heterogeneous in many ways in the political landscape. We think that, well, the model could be much more complicated. So, for example, the national goal, often, if you look at the public discourse, it is diluted by the political divide on COVID-19. For example, Trump downplayed the severity of COVID-19, at least in its early stage. And then Democrats emphasized the severity and need for action, whereas Republicans have a very different view. So this might be very telling here. So this is a Pew, a survey conducted by Pew Research Center in mid-March last year. So they looked at how Republicans and Democrats respond to different things regarding COVID-19. So the percentage could say that corona outbreak is a major threat to, for example, US economy. You can see that the Republicans are consistently lower than the Democrats on this. The health of US population as a whole, Republican is much lower, day-to-day life in your community, much lower, your personal financial situation, your personal health. So on all these, the Republican was scoring or respond in a much less extent than Democrats. So the Republican Democrats are divided in terms of their view about the threat posed by COVID-19. And then trust in Trump administration also might reduce the disease preventive behavior. And Republican and Democrats certainly have a very divided view. So we think that national identification would still help. So national identification promotes not only love for your fellow citizen, but also national identification promotes trust in national leader for Americans as well. For example, social identity approach of leadership said that in-group identification promotes trust in leaders that represent a group. For example, then President Trump. Political conservatives are more likely to consider Trump as representative of Americans. So other research has shown that already. So from our view, maybe the more complicated case is like this. So we think that it's human nature. If you identify with the group, you have in-group love, you would concern more about the welfare of your in-group. So you would also, engage in disease preventive behavior. So this link, the positive link here, and also possibly a recursive link here, might still hold. However, there could be another layer, another round of complication. So we think that political orientation would affect trust in Trump, especially for conservative. The conservative people, the more they identify with the nation, the more they trust in the Trump administration. And unfortunately, Trump administration actually undermined the disease preventive behavior. So we will see a negative link here. So this would be a link that counter the positive link over here. So that's the idea. Now this time we conduct a 5-wave analysis, 5-wave surveys. So starting from March, late March, when the disease is surging, so this is number of new cases in the United States. So when it's surging, our team went in and used an online platform, Cloud Research, to conduct a survey. So we start with over 1,000, slightly about 1,000 people. So they fill out our first wave, first time, late March, and then every other 2 weeks, every other weeks, we ask them to engage in our survey again, till late May. And the attrition rate, so the number dropped, the attrition rate on average is 15% per time. But still, at the end, we have still a good number, yeah, I would say. We are, divided slightly more females, 59–60%. And then the average age is 39 years old. So our sample here is slightly older than our Chinese sample, but still is about similar. Now, what did we ask them? So we asked national identification disease preventive behavior in a very similar way as we did in China. So at this moment, I feel good about being American. So same 4 items. And then we also asked frequency in the past week to engage in disease preventive behavior. And we used the 15 behaviors that are recommended by US CDC. Now, in addition to those, these 2 questions, we have add these 2 major new scales. Trust in Trump administration, because we think that this would mediate giving a negative route, and also political orientation, whether they are conservative or liberal. And we have the same set of covariates as in study 1. Now, the analysis is a little bit complicated. We use latent growth model to look at both the intercept and growth factor, okay? And however, I don't want to bother you with all these complicated. I will show you actually the data. But just a summary of the scatter plot that I'm going to show you. What we find is indeed, we find a positive route here. So time 1 national identification positively and significantly predict the growth factor of behavior. That means the increase in the behavior. And also, as we predicted, the political orientation moderate the link between national identification and trust in Trump. And then trust in Trump have a negative impact on the increased endorsement of the disease preventive behavior. And all these were significant even after we control for the covariates. Now, let me show you the, how it looks like in all the data points. So this panel shows the liberals. So we use median split to split. Can you hear me?
Okay, now you're unmuted.
Oh, you missed what I said.
Yeah, but Ying-yi, your time is actually running out. Can you try to summarize a little bit more concisely?
Oh, so which part, starting from which part you mean?
Just here at the scatter plot. Somehow your mic was...
Okay, I'm so sorry. Yeah, so let me quickly run through this. Actually, this was national identification, and then you see the conservatives show more trust in Trump rather than the liberal. So on this part is liberal. Let me go through this quickly. And indeed, even from the scatter plot, you see a drop in the disease preventive behavior for the conservative. So this is trust in Trump. The more you trust in Trump for the conservatives, there's a clear and significant decrease in disease preventive behavior. So let me summarize. U.S. national identification has mixed effect on the change of disease preventive behavior. So we find both a direct positive effect consistent with China. However, there is also a negative indirect effect via trust in the Trump administration. A negative indirect effect was more pronounced among political conservatives. So from the engagement in disease preventive behavior, however, we didn't find an increase in national identification, mainly because the U.S. national identification was in a declining trend when in our data set. Now, there are so many limitations because relatively small sample size, and by no means our samples are representative, and we used self-report exclusively. And also, very importantly, we only look at a small facet of national identity. So we do not argue for a universal appropriate method in curbing disease outbreak, nor are we making a value judgment that favors one country or its method over another. However, what we find is that national identification increase the engagement in disease preventive behavior. We think that this is quite robust and happened both in China and the United States. And also other people find it as well recently. So it's getting more and more evident supporting that. However, we think that the key factor here we look at is national identity. And national identity is very complex. There are different bases, could be political, socio-cultural, historical, and also what does national identity entail? What does it mean to people? It could mean obligations versus rights. And also the nature of national identity could be quite different. Some people might think it's fixed. Some people might think that it's malleable. And also there could be multiple identification as well. Now, we think that this is a critical moment to understand more about national identification because we see extreme form of national identification in the form of national narcissism that is on the rise. And it could have very direct consequence. No one country is safe until all countries are safe, but the pandemic posed a challenging context for intergroup relations. And in our own lab, actually, we start to look at national narcissism and conspiracy beliefs about COVID-19. And we do find that conspiracy beliefs is linked to disease preventive behavior and also could have a recursive relationship with prejudice and discrimination that we see on the rise, unfortunately. And so that's my last slide. And if you have any questions, I look forward to the Q&A at the end of this section. And also, if you want to contact me or want to visit our website, you can copy this or scan this QR code. Thank you so much for your time. And that's for my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ying-yi, for this rich data and very clear presentation. Our next speaker is Dr. Shen Hongchuan, Postdoctoral Fellow at the Department of Decision Sciences and Managerial Economics at the CUHK Business School. Dr. Shen received his PhD in physics from CUHK in 2016. His research focuses on the economics of IT. He studies the information design of platforms, the impact of AI on firm performance, and the social aspect of IT. His research uses large-scale data sets ranging from population size, mobility data, to individual-level digital traces data. His talk will be on behavioral responses to natural disasters, top-down and bottom-up engines. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Shen. Dr. Shen, please.
Thank you, Professor Cheung, for the nice introduction. And also thank you, Professor Hong, for the insightful sharing. Let me share my screen. Yeah. So Professor Hong compares the behavioral responses, the behavioral differences in the US and China. And here we will focus on the situation in China and study the role of Chinese institutions on the behavioral responses to COVID-19. Sorry. Here is our roadmap. Facing the outbreak of COVID-19, individuals' responses to the pandemic and the government interventions are quite diverging. Some strictly followed government rules and keep order, while some do not. And some people stockpile with panic, while others not. And the effectiveness of lockdown policy also varies substantially across different places. Although this phenomenon is well known, there still lacks a good understanding of it, in particular through the lens of human mobility. This is mostly due to data limitation. Leveraging a high accuracy mobility dataset in China, we study the behavioral responses to COVID-19 through the lens of human mobility. Specifically, we want to understand how do people respond to COVID-19 and the lockdown policy in terms of their mobility patterns, and what is the cause behind the heterogeneous mobility patterns across different regions. There might be many reasons. In this paper, we want to understand from two important institutional channels. One is a top-down channel, state capacity. It describes the infrastructure power to effectively implement policies. It is well known that different government has different power to implement policies. It can be one of the main factors that affect people's behaviors and the policy outcome. For example, some cities take drastic measures on lockdown, like seal the door where leaves people back from epicenter, while some take moderate measures like notices. Why different measures, and how does it affect the policy outcomes? The second, a bottom-up channel, is culture. Culture shapes our social behaviors from every aspect. For example, to advise people not to go outside, different areas use different slogans, since local culture may differ. Therefore, state capacity and culture are two of the main factors that shape people's behavioral responses to disasters. A good understanding of them can reveal the nature that why different countries with similar lockdown policies ended up with diverging results. As a preview of our results, we first identified the heterogeneous behavioral responses in human mobility before and after lockdown in mainland China. In panic period, which is before the lockdown policy took effect, but after the official confirmation of person-to-person virus transmission, more people were engaged in long-distance travels, whereas the remaining people reduced their unnecessary exposure to the outside. After the lockdown, people curtailed long-distance movement, but more people lingered in their neighborhood. And we found the two institutions shape human responses in different ways. The top-down channel shows that local cadres are more effective in implementing social distancing policies, while high promotion incentive cadres only enlarge lockdown effect in reducing long-distance travels due to it's more observable by their suppliers. The bottom-up channel reveals that people prone to Confucian culture show ostensible obedience during the pandemic, while those exposed to domestic religions are more altruistic. We use mobility to measure the outcomes of human responses. The data is at population level, covers all cities in China, and it contains detailed anonymous individual trajectories. The time resolution and the spatial accuracy are very high. It enables us to get direct and detailed measure of the outcomes of human responses to COVID-19 and the lockdown policy. Here is an example of an anonymous individual's daily trajectory. On January the 20th, this person traveled from one district to another, and he visited several places in both districts. On January the 26th, which is during the lockdown period, he stayed at the first district and visited several places around the community. We can see there is no long distance travels, but it seems he visited more places. We now define what are insubordinate individuals. Specifically, we use two different criteria. One is called restless in distance, which are users who traveled more than 10 kilometers in daytime from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. The other is called restless in places, which are users who visited more than 10 places in daytime. The rationale of our identification is that the major infection channel is through human-to-human contact. So shorter movement distance and less exposure to different places are the first choices to curtail spread. And also, they reflect the objectives of lockdown or social distancing policies. On average, during the whole period of our interest, we got more than 5,000 restless in distance insubordinates in 2020, about 2/3 of those in 2019, and a similar number of restless in places insubordinates in these 2 years. The total the number of total devices is a little bit different, so we will control in the following measures. To identify the two institutional channels, we construct 4 variables. For state capacity measure, we define a dummy local leader for each city if its prefectural secretary is incumbent within his origin province. Compared to the outsiders, locals cater more to the grassroots, provide more public goods, so they may implement policies in a way that better fits local needs. And we define a dummy promotion incentive if prefectural secretary is under age 55. Since in China, prefectural leaders who are older than 55 will not be considered for further promotion generally. Cadres with high promotion incentives are probably more active to follow central policies. For local culture measure, one variable is the number of domestic religion temples, including Taoism and Buddhism. The other is number of Confucian temples. They represent the cultural power of domestic religion and Confucianism, respectively. To clearly identify the behavioral responses in different situations, we divide our data into 3 periods. On January the 20th, Chinese government officially confirmed person-to-person infection of COVID-19 virus. So before that day, we call it normal period. It's our benchmark. And from January the 20th to January the 22nd, it's the panic period, since lockdown policy took effect on January the 23rd. Then until to February the 1st is the lockdown period. From February the 2nd, people start to resume work, and the mobility pattern might be different. So we terminate here. Now comes our results. First, let's get a picture about how people respond in this 3 periods. This figure shows the typical spatial distribution of insubordinate in normal, panic, and the lockdown period. The count increases from blue to red. We can see, besides the large distribution heterogeneity across the country, there are more restless in distance insubordinates in panic period, and a significant decrease in lockdown period, comparing to the normal period distribution. However, there are more restless in places insubordinates in lockdown period, which is surprising. To better identify this pattern, we implement this empirical strategy. Gamma I is for city fixed effect, for example, like population, GDP, and so on. And our dependent variable is the difference in the number of insubordinates between 2020 and 2019 for city I on the measured data T on lunar calendar, Chinese lunar calendar, to control the Spring Festival effect. It clearly reveals what we saw in the distributions. During the panic period, the mobility pattern is captured by the coefficient of panic. We find a significantly positive estimate in column 2 and a significantly negative one in column 4, jointly showing the pre-lockdown response pattern that more people conduct long-distance travel, possibly to escape from cities and return to their hometowns for an early reunion. And more people reduced their unnecessary exposure to the outside. The coefficient of lockdown period in column 2 shows long-distance travel has been significantly suppressed, indicating a successful administrative intervention, probably like set up checking points, cancel public traffic, and so on. Meanwhile, in column 4, we find a positive estimate of restless in places in subordinates, showing a failure of staying at home suggestions. So during the lockdown period, people indeed curtailed the long distance movement, but lingered more in their neighborhoods. This result suggests an ostensible rather than full compliance with the lockdown policy. Next, we want to understand the heterogeneous behavioral responses through institutions, specifically state capacity as the top-down channel and culture as the bottom-up channel. We run the following regressions to capture the effect of them through the measure of local leaders, promotion incentive for formal institution state capacity, and Confucian temples, the mass religion temples for informal institution culture. In column 1 and 2, we report the effect of high promotion incentive leaders before and after lockdown policy. Cadres with high promotion incentives spare little effort to curtail long-distance movement in the pre-lockdown period, but did very well in lockdown period. This is because before the announcement of the lockdown policy, performance in suppressing COVID-19 is not considered as a standard to reward or punish a leader. After the central government implemented this policy and required cities to control cross-regional movement, promising cadres become actively engaged in implementing it. However, these cadres show no difference in restricting restless in places in subordinates. A plausible explanation is because local movements around communities could rarely be detected by their superiors. So prefecture secretaries with higher career incentive would put lower weight on this intervention. On the other hand, local leaders show different effects on mobility patterns. Despite the little effect on long-distance travel, locals largely restricted unnecessary stays in both pre- and post-lockdown periods, indicating locals were more effective in implementing social distancing. And this is because local leaders have information advantages on local affairs, and therefore they achieved better performance than outsiders. In addition to state capacity, the mobility pattern could also be affected by local culture. Confucianism, as the most important culture in China, encourages people to obey all orders from the government and show worship of authority. We find people in a place that has been deeply influenced by Confucianism have no overt difference from their counterparts in the panic period. And as expected, after the lockdown, more people living in intensely confusion cities significantly reduced their long-distance movement, shown by the negative coefficient. However, we also find that the variance is somewhat ostensible, a positive one here, more restless in places insubordinates, indicating that people prone to Confucianism would obey those regulations that are easily supervised, but be slack behind the government's back. Second, we examine the role of domestic religions, including Taoism and Buddhism. As shown in column 3, people living in cities with deep religious faith were more likely to curtail their long-distance movement once they learned about person-to-person transmission, even before lockdown. A plausible explanation is that Taoism and Buddhism both emphasize the concept of reincarnation, 轮回, being altruistic in this life will be rewarded in future. This would de facto supplement the absence of governmental policy in the beginning of a pandemic. To conclude, we identified the heterogeneous behavioral responses through the lens of human mobility pattern by leveraging a comprehensive individual-level mobility dataset. We find intriguing behaviors in lockdown period that more people curtailed long-distance travel but lingered in neighborhood. We explained these heterogeneous behaviors from the institution perspective, state capacity, and the local culture. Our research sheds light on how institutional environments affect the behavioral responses when people face disasters and uncertainties. And thank you for listening.
Thank you, Dr. Shen, for this rich data from big data. Our discussant is Professor Tian, Associate Professor at the College of Business, Shanghai University of Finance and Economics. Professor Xie received his PhD from the Queen's University. His main research interests are forecast, combination, and model averaging, applied econometrics for data science, and financial volatility. His works are published in Review of Economics and Statistics, Management Science, and the Journal of Financial Econometrics. Professor Xie, please.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Hello, everyone. I'm Tian. I'm from Shanghai University of Finance and Economics. I'm actually more like an econometrician, so pay more attention on the methodological details and the data set. I got to say, it is a great pleasure to be the discussant for this webinar. So without any further ado, let's just get my discussion started. Okay, so let me start with the first paper. The title is War Against COVID-19, How is National Identification Linked with the Adoption of Disease Preventive Behaviors in China and the United States. Kind of a long title, but it's a very well-written paper. I think it's forthcoming in psychology, political psychology, so it must be good. So what authors are trying to do here is to link people's national identification, like patriotism or nationalism, with their government's behavior and responses to the COVID-19 pandemic. So in theory, I think this link should be reciprocal, which means if the national identification is strong, it should be easier for the governments to mobilize and motivate its people to engage in some preventive behaviors against this pandemic. And this in return should also heighten the national identification further. I mean, the motivation is kind of straightforward, but actually testing it is not so easy in reality due to this data limitation. I mean, the authors take their effort to collect all these data. In fact, the authors have to use 2 different data sources for their study. I think one of the survey data is from China. There's 2 rounds of collection process, and the other survey data is from the USA, and it takes like 5 rounds to collect the data. I mean, they also really take their effort, and they also found some positive relationship between the national identification and disease preventing behavior, which is kind of consistent with some existing literature, so that's good. This positive correlation does not just apply to big countries like China, US, India, Russia. I think it happens to many other countries as well. I'm pretty sure there's a very popular paper by Van Bavel, 2020, who also found this kind of a positive relationship in a cross-sectional study that involves 67 different countries. So you see, this actually applies to many other countries as well. And of course, every country is unique, just like every human being is unique. When you're handling the data, constructing the models, we must accept the fact that there will always be a heterogeneity. Take the correlation between the national identification and the disease preventive behavior, for instance. The correlation is positive in general, applies to everyone on the middle of the curve. But the magnitude and the dynamics of this positive correlation, they must be different for different countries in different time period. So I'm got excited to see that the authors really took some effort analyzing and digesting this heterogeneous effect lurking inside of their data set. They studied and compared the different situations and government behaviors in China and US, and the results from the Chinese sample showed that the effect is quite universal. It starts from the beginning to the end, normally makes sense. But in contrast, in the USA, the authors showed that the effect was more like a mix. So on average, the correlation is still positive. But once we focus on different subsamples at different time periods, the effect can differ dramatically. So this actually shows you how difficult it is when you're trying to handle this kind of data set. There's not just global heterogeneity between China and US that you have to take care of, but there is also significant local heterogeneity, for example, in the US data sample that Hongchuan. To disentangle this kind of local heterogeneity, I think the authors incorporated some political status related variables in the regression analysis and got some very interesting results. The authors found that those who had stronger trust in Trump and his administration were significantly slower in adopting preventive behavior relative to others. Well, that makes sense. That's what we expect. But finally, someone provided me a piece of empirical evidence. This is awesome. And this negative indirect effect was more pronounced among the Republicans relative to Democrats. I mean, what a surprise, awesome. I found these results very interesting and even a little bit intriguing, and they all make sense. So overall, I mean, I really enjoyed reading this paper, and I feel honored to be its discussant. I do have one bone to pick, however, but this is, by the way, this is also mentioned in the paper itself, so I'm not trying to be the mean person here. The whole study relied on what we called the self-reported survey. So survey data is direct, it is simple, it is straightforward, it is motivated, but it may subject to severe selection bias and measurement error. So it will be great if future work can utilize a larger data set, for example, social media data, something that I'm particularly interested in. Because social media data, for some extent, it also reflects a person's political status and his or her angle on the national identification. So you can definitely obtain much more observation than 2,201, which is the number of observations in their paper. So using this social media data, so that could be a potentially a future research field for this paper, like an extension based on the current very well-written piece of work. Speaking of large data set, here comes my discussion on the second paper. The title of the paper is Behavioral Responses to Natural Disasters, Top-Down and Bottom-Up Engines. Compared to the first paper, the second paper is relatively short, but also very well written and kind of easy to read, so it's really good. This paper tries to figure out the main characteristics that drive people's behavioral responses to the COVID-19 pandemic. Be it politics, like who's your leader, who's leading you, or the culture, like who do you believe, or what kind of religion do you trust, right? The authors have a very unique cell phone-based data set, which records real-time human movement information. So the authors provide evidence that in general, people reduce long-distance movement, but increase movement around their neighborhoods during the lockdown period in China, and that's kind of interesting. Specifically, the author analyzed the effect of local leadership and culture on people's behavior during the pandemic, which is like out of my brain, awesome. The authors argue that the local leaders' effectiveness in implementing this kind of lockdown policies is a really important factor on reducing total movement distance. Although those with higher promotion incentives only increase the lockdown effect in reducing long distance travel. And the author also provide a reason for that, which kind of makes sense to me, because for those who want to get higher promotion, because the long distance travel was more intensively inspected by their superiors. So they want to please their superiors. Therefore, for those who want to get higher promotion, to pay more attention on the long distance travel, but pay less attention on the local travel, which is not supervised or inspected by their superiors. So that makes sense. The author also found out that people under the influence of Confucian culture and the Chinese Taoism tend to have very different behavior under the same lockdown policy, which kind of adds the flavor of heterogeneity in their research, which is awesome, which is also the part that I enjoy reading very, very much. So nowadays, I mean, many researchers are trying to get their hands on the COVID-19 related topics. And this paper, it has a very interesting angle, and most importantly, it allowed me to say that a very sexy data set with macro level features. So with this gold mine, I'm sure the authors can do many, many things that others cannot. And the authors consider the COVID-19 pandemic as a natural experiment. Well, that's up to debate, but I will just continue and apply the conventional DID estimation to capture the treatment effect. As an econometrician, I do have some concerns on the estimation method that the authors adopted. So the DID estimation framework that the authors used, which is the equation 1 on page 14, I think, which is a two-way fixed effect estimator. So according to a vastly popular but recently published paper by Goodman and Bacon's 2019 paper, the general estimator from the two-way fixed effect approach is actually a weighted average of all the possible two-group, two-period DID estimators in the data. And that these weights are often negative and not intuitive, basically just jeopardize everything. So under this two-way fixed effect approach, researchers estimated regression with dummies for cross-sectional units under time periods and a treatment dummy. So the post and treat variables are thus subsummed by the fixed effect structure. As explained in Goodman and Bacon 2019 paper, we know relatively little about this two-way fixed effect DID value measures when treatment timing varies, which definitely applies to COVID-19 case in this, in my opinion, right? So as COVID-19 lasts, the effect is actually changing. So this includes how it compares mean outcomes across groups and when alternative specifications will work or why they change the estimates. So to clarify what I just described, I hope I didn't lose you guys. What Goodman and Bacon 2019 paper derivations shows is that we can think of this two-way fixed effect estimator as a weighted average of individual 2x2 DID estimators with weights proportional to the group sizes and the variance of the treatment indicators in each pair. So you see, some of the 2x2 estimators use the units treated at a particular time as the treatment group and never treated units as a control group, while others use the units treated at two different times, with the latter treated groups being used as a control before the treatment begins, and the earlier treated groups being used as a control after its treatment begins. So intuitively, when the treatment effects do not change over time, which is like the conventional ideal case, all the weights are positive and we are fine. However, when the treatment effects does vary across time, some of these 2x2 estimates enter the average with negative weights. And this is because the already treated units now act as the controls, and the changes in the proportion of their treatment effects over time are subtracted from the DID estimates. That's why they can be negative. And these negative weights, they basically jeopardize the accuracy or even the consistency of the whole estimation. So I hope I didn't lose you guys. When I start talking about the mathematics, my students just walk away. So before the year 2017, people can apply this conventional two-way fixed effect DID estimate whenever they want without any challenges. But after the year 2017, econometricians, we realized the potential issues lurking inside of this simple estimator. Hence, in order to apply this conventional DID estimator, we have to examine the assumptions very, very carefully. So I think the authors may want to check if their current framework satisfies this assumption of a conventional DID estimator. And this way, you can make your estimation definitely more rigorous and more robust, right? So in the end, I want to emphasize that both papers and my discussions do not try to argue for a universally appropriate method in curbing disease outbreaks, nor are we making a value judgment that favors one country or its measures over the others. We are scientists, right? We don't make judgment calls. We list the facts, we extract useful pattern from the data, and we let the result speak for itself. So that wraps up my discussion, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Xie, for raising notes. And I'd like to thank our two speakers and our discussant again. I'd like to please join me in thanking Professor Ying-yi, Dr. Hongchuan Shen, and Professor Xie Tian.